The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Marcus Johnson walked through the main gate. He wore the simple uniform of a security guard, his badge gleaming but unremarkable. Soldiers passed by him every day, their eyes barely registering his presence. To them, he was just another face in the background, someone who checked IDs and waved them through. Marcus had grown used to being invisible. At 52, he had learned that people saw what they expected to see. They saw a middle-aged man in a guard's uniform, not the decorated Marine who had once served his country with honor. His gray hair was neatly trimmed, his posture still military straight despite the years that had passed since he last wore dress blues. The base was buzzing with activity that morning. A new unit of Marines had arrived the day before, fresh from training and eager to prove themselves. Marcus watched them with quiet interest as they marched past his station. Their youth reminded him of another time, another life when he too had worn their uniform with pride. Lieutenant Sarah Chen was among the new arrivals. She had noticed the guard during her first day, mainly because of how he carried himself. There was something different about him, something that didn't quite match his civilian job. The way he stood, the way his eyes scanned the area, even the way he greeted the officers suggested a military background. During her lunch break, Sarah found herself walking past the security station again. Marcus was there reviewing some paperwork, his movements precise and methodical. She decided to stop and introduce herself, partly out of curiosity, and partly because she believed in treating everyone with respect, regardless of their rank or position. "Good afternoon," she said, approaching his window. "I'm Lieutenant Chen, just arrived yesterday." Marcus looked up, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. "Afternoon, Lieutenant. Welcome to the base. I'm Marcus Johnson." There was something in his voice, a certain cadence that Sarah recognized. It was the way Marines spoke, even years after leaving the service. She studied his face more carefully, noting the small scars and the alert eyes that missed nothing. "Have you been working here long?" she asked, genuinely interested. "About 3 years now," Marcus replied, his tone friendly but reserved. "Quiet work suits me fine." As Sarah walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Marcus Johnson than met the eye. She had grown up in a military family and had learned to read people, especially those who had served. Everything about the guard suggested a military background, but she wondered why he had chosen such a low-profile job on a base where he could have been working in a more prestigious position. That evening, Sarah mentioned her encounter to her roommate, Captain Lisa Rodriguez, who had been on the base for 6 months. Lisa had her own observations about the security guard. "You mean Marcus?" Lisa said, looking up from her book. "Yeah, there's definitely something about him. I've seen him handle difficult situations with visitors, and he does it like someone who's been in command before. Very calm, very professional." The two women agreed that Marcus Johnson was more than he appeared to be, but neither could have imagined the true extent of his service or the reasons he had chosen to fade into the background. In the days that followed, more Marines began to notice small things about the guard that set him apart from ordinary civilian security personnel. Sergeant Mike Torres, a veteran of 2 deployments, was the first to voice what many were thinking. "That guard moves like military," he told his squad during evening chow. "Watch him tomorrow when you come through the gate. He's got the bearing." Word began to spread quietly through the ranks. The new Marines started paying more attention to Marcus, noting his precise movements, his professional demeanor, and the respect he showed for the uniform they wore. But Marcus remained an enigma, polite and efficient in his duties while revealing nothing about his past. What none of them knew was that Marcus Johnson had his own reasons for keeping his history private. The medals in his closet at home told a story of courage and sacrifice that he preferred to leave in the past. He had chosen the quiet life of a security guard, not because he couldn't do more, but because he had already given enough. As the weeks passed, the Marines grew more curious about the man who greeted them each day. Some tried to engage him in longer conversations, hoping to learn more about his background. Marcus was always friendly but carefully avoided revealing anything significant about his past service. The mystery of Marcus Johnson was about to deepen, and the truth about who he really was would soon test everything the Marines thought they knew about honor, sacrifice, and brotherhood. In the quiet moments between shifts, Marcus sometimes allowed himself to remember the men he had served with, the battles he had fought, and the brothers he had lost. But those memories were his burden to carry alone. or so he believed. 3 weeks into their deployment, the Marines at the base had settled into their routines. The morning rush through the security gate had become a familiar part of their day, and Marcus Johnson had become a fixture they barely noticed. But that was about to change. It started on a Tuesday morning when a group of civilian contractors arrived for a scheduled maintenance inspection. They were loud, disrespectful, and clearly thought little of military protocol. When they reached Marcus's security station, their leader, a burly man named Rick Thompson, was already in a foul mood. "This is ridiculous," Thompson complained loudly, throwing his identification at Marcus's window. "We've been coming here for months. You should know who we are by now." Marcus remained calm, his voice steady and professional. "I understand your frustration, sir, but I need to verify everyone's credentials according to protocol." Thompson's face reddened. "Protocol? You're just a rent-a-cop, buddy. Don't lecture me about protocol." Lieutenant Chen happened to be approaching the gate at that moment and witnessed the exchange. She watched as Marcus's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. His back straightened, his jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained controlled. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back and allow me to process your documentation properly," Marcus said, his tone now carrying an unmistakable note of authority. Something in Marcus's voice made Thompson pause. For a moment, the contractor seemed to recognize that he was dealing with someone who commanded respect, not demanded it. But Thompson's ego wouldn't let him back down completely. "Fine, but make it quick," Thompson muttered, stepping back. As Marcus efficiently processed the contractor's paperwork, Sarah noticed how he had diffused the situation without raising his voice or showing any sign of being intimidated. It was the kind of leadership she had seen from experienced, non-commissioned officers. The kind that came from years of dealing with difficult people in high-stress situations. After the contractors passed through, Sarah approached Marcus's station. "That was well handled," she said. Marcus looked up, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Some people just need clear boundaries, Lieutenant. Nothing more to it than that." But Sarah saw more to it than that. The way Marcus had taken control of the situation spoke of someone who was used to command, someone who understood how to project authority without aggression. She filed the observation away, adding it to her growing list of questions about the enigmatic guard. Word of the incident spread through the Marine unit by lunchtime. Sergeant Torres had witnessed the entire exchange from a distance and shared his observations with his squad. "Did you see how he handled that civilian?" Torres asked during their meal. "That wasn't security guard training. That was military leadership." Corporal James Wright, one of the younger Marines, had been thinking the same thing. "My dad was a drill instructor for 20 years, he said. He moves and talks just like my old man used to." The Marines began to watch Marcus more carefully after that. They noticed how he inspected the gate area each morning, with the thoroughness of someone conducting a military inspection. They saw how he maintained his uniform, how he addressed officers, and how he carried himself during quiet moments when he thought no one was watching. Captain Rodriguez decided to do some discreet investigating. She had connections in the personnel office and access to basic employment records. What she found was frustratingly sparse. Marcus Johnson's file showed he had been hired 3 years ago with excellent references from previous security positions. His background check was clean, but there were no details about military service. The lack of information only deepened the mystery. In Rodriguez's experience, most security guards on military bases were either former military personnel, whose service was documented, or civilians whose backgrounds were thoroughly vetted. Marcus seemed to fall into neither category. Meanwhile, Marcus was becoming aware of the increased attention. He had noticed the Marines watching him more closely, their conversations that stopped when he approached, and the way some of them seemed to be studying his every move. He knew he was walking a fine line between maintaining his privacy and arousing suspicion. The situation came to a head the following week when a new commanding officer arrived for an inspection. Colonel Patricia Hayes was known for her attention to detail and her ability to spot irregularities. During her tour of the base, she stopped at the security station to review procedures. Marcus snapped to attention when she approached, his movements sharp and precise. Colonel Hayes noticed immediately. "At ease," she said, studying him carefully. "How long have you been in this position, Mr. Johnson?" 3 years, ma'am," Marcus replied, his bearing unmistakably military despite his civilian clothes. Colonel Hayes asked several routine questions about security procedures, which Marcus answered with the kind of thoroughness and attention to detail that impressed her. But it was his demeanor that caught her attention most. He stood at perfect attention when she arrived, addressed her with the proper respect due her rank, and demonstrated a level of professionalism that went far beyond typical civilian security training. After the colonel left, the Marines who had witnessed the interaction were more convinced than ever that Marcus Johnson was not just a security guard. The way he had responded to a senior officer was instinctive, automatic, the kind of behavior that came from years of military discipline. That evening, a group of Marines gathered informally to discuss their observations. Lieutenant Chen, Captain Rodriguez, Sergeant Torres, and several others compared notes about their interactions with Marcus. "He's former military, no question," Rodriguez said. "The question is what branch and what rank? And why is he working as a security guard?" Chen added. "Someone with his bearing and professionalism could easily get a better position on base." Sergeant Torres had his own theory. "Maybe he's seen enough action and just wants a quiet life. Some guys come back and want nothing to do with the military lifestyle." But even Torres had to admit that something didn't add up. Most veterans who wanted to distance themselves from military life didn't choose to work on a military base. Marcus's presence there suggested he still felt some connection to military service, even if he was keeping his past hidden. As the Marines continued their speculation, none of them could have imagined the real reason Marcus Johnson had chosen to blend into the background. The truth about his service record would shock them, and the circumstances that led him to his current position would challenge everything they thought they knew about duty, sacrifice, and the price of honor. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Corporal Danny Mitchell had been having trouble sleeping since arriving at the base. The young Marine had recently returned from his first deployment and was still adjusting to life stateside. On Thursday night, unable to sleep, he decided to take a walk around the base perimeter. The night air was cool and quiet, with only the distant hum of generators and the occasional footsteps of the night watch. As Danny walked past the main gate area, he was surprised to see a figure sitting on a bench near the security station. It was Marcus Johnson, still in his uniform, staring out at the darkened base. Danny hesitated, unsure whether to approach. Marcus seemed lost in thought, and there was something about his posture that suggested he was carrying a heavy burden, but something compelled the young Marine to walk over. "Evening, Mr. Johnson," Danny said quietly. "Couldn't sleep either?" Marcus looked up, startled from his reverie. "Oh, hello, Corporal. Just finishing up some paperwork. What is you up so late?" Danny shrugged. "Just thinking too much, I guess. Sometimes it's hard to shut off the brain, you know." Marcus nodded slowly. "I do know. Some thoughts are harder to leave behind than others." There was something in Marcus's tone that resonated with Danny. It was the voice of someone who understood what it meant to carry memories that wouldn't fade. Experiences that changed you in ways you couldn't always explain. "Were you ever deployed?" Danny asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Sorry, I didn't mean to pry." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on something in the distance that Danny couldn't see. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "A long time ago," he said. "Different wars, different times." Danny felt a chill run down his spine. There was pain in Marcus's voice, the kind that came from seeing things no one should have to see. Without thinking, he sat down on the bench beside the older man. "My grandfather was in Vietnam," Danny said. "He used to sit outside at night like this. My grandmother said he was talking to his buddies who didn't make it home." Marcus turned to look at the young Marine, and Danny saw something in his eyes that confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't just a former soldier. This was someone who had paid a price for his service. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man," Marcus said. "Sometimes the night is the only time we can have those conversations." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two Marines separated by generations but connected by shared understanding. Finally, Danny worked up the courage to ask the question that had been bothering him for weeks. "Mr. Johnson, can I ask you something? The way you carry yourself, the way you handle situations, you're not just former military, are you? You were someone important." Marcus was quiet for so long that Danny thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of years. "Ranks and titles don't matter much when you're sitting alone at night, son. What matters is whether you can live with the decisions you made and the men you couldn't bring home." Danny felt his throat tighten. He was beginning to understand that Marcus Johnson carried burdens that went far beyond anything he had imagined. "Were you an officer?" Danny asked gently. Marcus shook his head. "Enlisted. Started as a private, same as everyone else. But I spent enough time in leadership positions to know the weight of responsibility." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the night watch supervisor, who was surprised to find both men there. After brief explanations, Danny headed back to the barracks, but the encounter stayed with him through the sleepless remainder of the night. The next morning, Danny found himself watching Marcus with new eyes. Every movement, every gesture seemed to confirm what he had suspected. This wasn't just a former Marine. This was someone who had seen combat, who had led men in battle, and who carried the scars of command. Danny confided in Sergeant Torres about his late-night conversation. Torres listened intently, asking detailed questions about Marcus's demeanor and exact words. He said he started as a private but spent time in leadership positions, Torres mused. That suggests he made rank, probably significant rank. The two Marines decided to approach Lieutenant Chen with their observations. Chen had been gathering her own intelligence about Marcus and was eager to hear what they had learned. "He mentioned different wars," Chen said thoughtfully. "That could mean he served in multiple conflicts. If he's in his 50s now, he could have been in the Gulf War, maybe even the early years of Iraq and Afghanistan." Captain Rodriguez joined the discussion, bringing her own insights. "I've been thinking about his job choice," she said. "A man with his bearing could easily get a position with more responsibility and better pay. The fact that he chose to be a security guard suggests he's either hiding from something or trying to stay connected to military life without the pressure of command." The group agreed that Marcus Johnson was becoming more of a mystery with each new piece of information, but they also agreed that whatever his past, he deserved their respect and privacy. They decided to continue observing but to avoid direct confrontation about his background. What they didn't know was that Marcus had been aware of their increased interest for some time. He had noticed the way they watched him, the conversations that stopped when he approached, and the more frequent attempts to engage him in personal conversation. He was walking a tightrope between maintaining his privacy and arousing enough suspicion to warrant an official investigation. That afternoon, an incident occurred that would push the Marines closer to the truth about Marcus Johnson. A delivery truck arrived at the gate with supplies for the base commissary. The driver was new and unfamiliar with military protocol. When Marcus asked for proper identification and manifests, the driver became belligerent. "Look, old man, I've got a schedule to keep," the driver said aggressively. "Just wave me through and let me do my job." Marcus remained calm but firm. "I need to see your delivery authorization and inspect your cargo manifest." The driver stepped out of his truck and moved aggressively toward Marcus's station. "You want to make this difficult? I've got connections that can get you fired, buddy." What happened next would be talked about in the Marine barracks for weeks to come. Marcus stepped out of his security booth and faced the driver directly. His transformation was immediate and dramatic. The mild-mannered security guard was gone, replaced by someone who radiated command authority. "Sir, you will step back, produce your required documentation, and conduct yourself in a manner appropriate to this military installation," Marcus said, his voice carrying a tone of absolute command that brooked no argument. The driver found himself stepping back without conscious thought. There was something in Marcus's presence that commanded instant obedience, something that spoke of someone who had faced down much more dangerous opponents than an angry truck driver. Within minutes, the situation was resolved. The driver produced his paperwork, submitted to the cargo inspection, and proceeded to the commissary without further incident. But the Marines who witnessed the exchange were left with no doubt that Marcus Johnson was far more than he appeared to be. The investigation into Marcus's background was about to take a dramatic turn, and the truth they would uncover would change everything they thought they knew about the quiet man who guarded their gate. The incident with the truck driver had been a turning point, but it was Sergeant First Class Maria Santos who provided the key to unlocking Marcus Johnson's mystery. Santos had arrived at the base the previous week as part of a temporary training assignment. Unlike the younger Marines, she had 20 years of experience and connections throughout the military community. Santos had been watching Marcus for only a few days when something about him triggered a memory. During lunch on Friday, she approached Lieutenant Chen with a question that would change everything. "That security guard, Marcus Johnson," Santos said, sitting down across from Chen. How long did you say he's been here? About 3 years, Chen replied. Why? Santos pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. I think I might know him. There was a Marine I served with in Afghanistan. Different unit, but same forward operating base. His last name was Johnson, first name Marcus. He was a gunnery sergeant then, one hell of a Marine. Chen felt her pulse quicken. When was this? 2007, maybe 2008. He was with a reconnaissance unit, the kind that did the jobs nobody talks about. But here's the thing. The Marcus Johnson I knew had a distinctive scar on his left hand from an IED blast. Has anyone noticed if our security guard has any scars? The question hung in the air as Chen tried to remember her interactions with Marcus. She had shaken his hand a few times, but she couldn't recall any distinctive scars. We need to find out, Chen said. But we have to be careful. If this is the same person, there might be reasons he doesn't want his identity known. Santos nodded. Agreed, but if it is him, we're not talking about just any Marine. The Marcus Johnson I knew was a legend. He saved a lot of lives, including some from my unit. That afternoon, Santos volunteered to take a message to the security station, giving her an excuse to interact with Marcus directly. She approached his window with a routine question about visitor procedures. But her real purpose was to get a closer look at his hands. As Marcus reached for the clipboard to show her the sign-in procedures, Santos saw it clearly, a distinctive scar across the back of his left hand, exactly where she remembered it. Her breath caught in her throat. Thank you, Gunny, she said without thinking, using the nickname for gunnery sergeant. Marcus froze, his eyes meeting hers for a long moment. Santos saw recognition flash across his face, followed immediately by wariness. I think you have me confused with someone else, Sergeant, Marcus said carefully, but Santos wasn't fooled. Forward Operating Base Chapman, 2007. You pulled 3 Marines out of a burning Humvee after an IED attack. One of those Marines was Private Rodriguez from my unit. Marcus's facade cracked slightly. That was a long time ago, Sergeant. Different life. Not that different, apparently, Santos said gently. You're still watching out for Marines. The conversation was brief, but it confirmed Santos's suspicions. She returned to the barracks with news that would stun the entire unit. His name is Marcus Johnson, all right, she told the assembled group of Marines. But he's not just any former Marine. He's Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Johnson, recipient of the Silver Star, Purple Heart, and Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Combat V. The room fell silent. Even the youngest Marines understood the significance of those decorations. This wasn't just a veteran. This was a war hero. What's a decorated gunnery sergeant doing working as a security guard? Corporal Wright asked. Santos had wondered the same thing. That's what we need to find out. But we need to be respectful about it. If he wanted his service record to be public knowledge, he would have made it known. Captain Rodriguez had been quietly listening to the conversation. As the senior officer present, she knew she had a responsibility to handle the situation carefully. Here's what we're going to do, she said. We're going to treat Gunnery Sergeant Johnson with the respect he deserves, but we're not going to make a big deal about his identity unless he wants us to. He's chosen to keep a low profile, and we need to respect that choice. But respecting Marcus's privacy became more difficult as word spread through the unit. Marines who had previously barely noticed the security guard now found themselves standing a little straighter. When they passed his station, some began greeting him with subtle nods of respect, while others struggled with the knowledge that they had been casually dismissing a decorated war hero. Marcus noticed the change immediately. The way Marines looked at him now, the increased attention, the barely concealed recognition in their eyes, it all confirmed his worst fears. His carefully constructed anonymity was crumbling. The situation came to a head on Monday morning when a group of visiting dignitaries arrived at the base for an inspection. Among them was General Patricia Williams, a Marine Corps legend who had served multiple combat tours and was known for her attention to detail. As the official convoy approached the security gate, Marcus performed his usual procedures with professional efficiency. But when General Williams stepped out of her vehicle to stretch her legs during the processing, she took a closer look at the security guard checking credentials. Something about Marcus caught her attention immediately. His bearing, his manner of handling the security procedures, and especially the way he addressed her, suggested a military background. But it was when she noticed the scar on his left hand that recognition dawned. Gunnery Sergeant Johnson, she said quietly, stepping closer to his station. Marcus looked up and his face went pale. General Williams was someone from his past. Someone who knew exactly who he was and what he had done. General Williams, he said, standing straighter. It's good to see you again, ma'am. What in the hell are you doing working as a security guard, Gunny? She asked, her voice carrying both concern and confusion. Marcus glanced around, aware that several Marines were watching the interaction with intense interest. It's a long story, General. Perhaps we could discuss it later. General Williams studied his face carefully. She saw something there that concerned her, a weariness that went beyond normal post-service adjustment, a withdrawal from the military community that suggested deeper issues. We will definitely discuss this later, she said firmly. But for now, it's good to see you're still serving, even if it's in a different capacity. As the official convoy moved on, Marcus knew that his secret was out. The Marines at the base now knew not just that he was a former Marine, but that he was someone significant enough to be personally recognized by a general officer. The weight of unwanted attention settled on his shoulders like a familiar burden. He had spent 3 years building a quiet, anonymous life, and now it was all falling apart. But what he didn't yet realize was that the Marines around him weren't judging him for his current position. They were trying to understand what had brought a war hero to seek anonymity, and they were prepared to support him regardless of what they learned. The truth about Marcus Johnson's journey from decorated Marine to security guard was about to be revealed, and it would test the bonds of brotherhood that connected all Marines past and present. That evening, General Williams returned to the base alone, having dismissed her aide for the day. She found Marcus at his usual spot on the bench near the security station, staring out into the darkness. The general had changed into casual clothes, but her bearing remained unmistakably military. Mind if I join you, Gunny? She asked, settling onto the bench without waiting for an answer. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. General, you don't need to— Cut the formalities, Marcus, Williams interrupted. We've known each other too long for that. I want to know what happened. The last time I saw you, you were being recommended for promotion to first sergeant. Now I find you working security at a gate. Something doesn't add up. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with pain. Do you remember Operation Desert Shield, General? The mission we ran in Helmand Province in 2009? Williams nodded. She remembered it well. A nighttime extraction of a captured Marine pilot behind enemy lines. Marcus had led the rescue team that brought the pilot home safely. I remember, she said. You brought Lieutenant Patterson home. It was textbook work. Marcus shook his head. What wasn't textbook was what happened 2 weeks later. My squad got hit by an IED on what should have been a routine patrol. 4 Marines under my command didn't make it home. The general felt a chill of understanding. She had seen it before. Good Marines destroyed not by enemy action, but by survivors' guilt and the weight of command responsibility. Marcus, you know that wasn't your fault. IEDs were my responsibility to detect and avoid, Marcus finished. I was the squad leader. Those men trusted me to keep them safe, and I failed them. Williams studied his profile in the dim light from the security station. She could see the pain etched in the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried a burden that had nothing to do with physical weight. Tell me what happened after that, she said gently. Marcus's voice became even quieter. I finished my tour, came back stateside. Everyone wanted to pin more medals on me, talk about my service record, my leadership. But all I could think about were the faces of the Marines who didn't come home. Jackson was 19. Lopez had just gotten engaged. Williams, no relation to you, General, was going to be a father. He stopped talking, lost in memories that still haunted him years later. General Williams waited patiently, knowing that sometimes the most important conversations happened in the spaces between words. I tried to stay in. Marcus continued. Thought maybe I could honor their memory by continuing to serve. But every time I looked at young Marines, all I could see were the faces of the ones I lost. Every time someone called me Gunny or asked for leadership, I felt like a fraud. So you left the Corps? Marcus nodded. Took early retirement. Spent a couple of years drinking too much and feeling sorry for myself. My wife, ex-wife now, tried to help, but I was too far gone. Lost my family along with everything else. General Williams felt a deep sadness for the man beside her. She had seen too many good Marines destroyed by the psychological wounds of war. Casualties that didn't show up in official reports, but were just as real as any physical injury. "How did you end up here?" she asked. "Got sober about 4 years ago. Realized I needed to find a way to be useful again, but I couldn't handle being in charge of people's lives. This job, it lets me serve without having to make life or death decisions. I can still be around Marines, still contribute something, but from a safe distance." The conversation was interrupted by footsteps approaching. Lieutenant Chen appeared out of the darkness, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. "I was just checking on the night watch and saw you both here." General Williams gestured for her to join them. "Actually, Lieutenant, your timing is perfect. I think it's time some people learned the full story about Gunnery Sergeant Johnson here." Marcus tensed. "General, I know what you'd prefer, Marcus, but hiding from your service record isn't helping anyone, including you." Williams turned to Chen. "Lieutenant, what do you know about this man's military service?" Chen glanced at Marcus, then back at the general. "We know he served in Afghanistan, that he's a decorated Marine. Sergeant Santos recognized him from when they served together." Williams nodded. "What you don't know is that Gunnery Sergeant Johnson here is responsible for saving more than 50 lives during his combat tours. He led rescue missions that brought home captured personnel. He pulled wounded Marines out of kill zones, and he trained hundreds of young Marines who went on to serve with distinction." Marcus looked uncomfortable with the praise. "General, please, I'm not finished," Williams continued. "What you also don't know is that he's been carrying the weight of 4 Marines who died under his command, blaming himself for an IED attack that no one could have prevented." Chen felt her throat tighten. She was beginning to understand the depth of pain that Marcus carried, and why he had chosen to fade into the background. "Gunnery Sergeant," she said formally, "I want you to know that every Marine on this base respects you, not just for what you've done, but for who you are right now. You may think you're just a security guard, but you're wrong. You're still taking care of Marines." Marcus looked at her with surprise. "I don't understand." "You remember Corporal Mitchell? The young Marine who couldn't sleep?"
He told me about your conversation with him.
"You gave him something he needed. Understanding from someone who had been where he was. That's not security work, Gunny. That's Marine leadership." General Williams smiled slightly. "She's right, Marcus. You can't stop being a Marine just by changing your uniform. These young people look up to you, whether you realize it or not." Over the next hour, other Marines began to appear. Sergeant Santos arrived first, followed by Corporal Wright, then Sergeant Torres. Word had spread that their mystery security guard was having a conversation with a general, and curiosity had drawn them out. What they found was not the confrontation they had expected, but something more like a family meeting.
General Williams spoke about Marcus's service record, his sacrifices, and his ongoing contribution to the Marine community.
Marcus reluctantly at first began to share some of his experiences and the struggles he had faced since leaving active duty. As the night wore on, the Marines learned that their quiet security guard was not just a decorated veteran, but a man who had paid a heavy price for his service and was still searching for a way to find peace with his past. They also learned that his presence at their base was not an accident or a step down from his previous life, but a deliberate choice to continue serving in the only way he felt he could. By the time the informal gathering broke up near midnight, something fundamental had changed on the base. Marcus Johnson was no longer just a security guard who happened to be a former Marine. He was Gunnery Sergeant Johnson, a brother who had earned his place in their community through service, sacrifice, and the ongoing courage to keep serving despite his inner battles. But the most important change was in Marcus himself. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere, surrounded by people who understood both his accomplishments and his struggles. The weight he had been carrying alone was now shared by a community that refused to let him face his demons in isolation. The transformation began gradually but unmistakably. In the days following the revelation of Marcus's true identity, the atmosphere around the security station changed dramatically. Marines who had previously hurried past with barely a nod now stopped to chat, share coffee, or simply check in with their gunnery sergeant. The change wasn't lost on Marcus. For the first time in years, he felt the warmth of genuine military camaraderie. Young Marines sought his advice on everything from career decisions to personal problems. Sergeants asked for his input on training methods, Officers treated him with the respect due his rank and experience, regardless of his current job title. Lieutenant Chen had become one of Marcus's most frequent visitors. She had taken it upon herself to ensure he felt welcomed and valued by the unit. During one of their conversations, she brought up something that had been bothering her. "Gunny, can I ask you something personal?" she said, settling into the chair across from his desk in the security station. Marcus looked up from his paperwork. "Shoot, Lieutenant. Why do you still blame yourself for what happened in Afghanistan? You said those Marines trusted you to keep them safe, but isn't that what all leaders face? The possibility that people under their command might not come home?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering her question. "You're right, of course. Intellectually, I know that. But knowing something and feeling it are two different things. When you're responsible for people's lives, every decision you make carries weight. When those decisions result in good Marines dying, that weight becomes crushing." Chen leaned forward. "But what about all the Marines who did come home because of your decisions? Sergeant Santos told me you saved her unit when they were pinned down by enemy fire. How many families are intact today because of actions you took?" Marcus had heard similar arguments from therapists, from General Williams, from well-meaning friends over the years. But somehow hearing it from a young Marine officer who was currently dealing with the same pressures of command made it resonate differently. "I've tried to focus on that," he admitted. "Some days are better than others." Their conversation was interrupted by Corporal Mitchell, who approached the station with obvious excitement. "Gunny, you've got to see this," he said, holding up his phone. "My little brother just graduated from Marine boot camp. I told him about you, and he wanted me to pass along a message." Marcus accepted the phone and saw a photo of a young Marine in dress blues, standing proudly at attention. The accompanying text message read, "Tell Gunnery Sergeant Johnson that PFC Mitchell is honored to serve in the same corps as a Marine hero. Semper Fi." Marcus felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years, pride in the uniform and the organization he had spent most of his adult life serving. The young Marine in the photo didn't know him personally, but he represented the continuation of something Marcus had thought he was no longer part of. "Your brother looks sharp." "Corporal," Marcus said, handing back the phone. "The Corps is lucky to have him." The incident marked a turning point in Marcus's relationship with the Marines on the base. He began to see himself not as an outsider looking in, but as part of a continuum of service that connected him to Marines of all generations. Sergeant Torres approached him later that week with a proposal that caught Marcus off guard. "Gunny, we've got a problem with some of the newer Marines," Torres said. "They're having trouble adjusting to military life, and frankly, some of us senior NCOs aren't connecting with them the way we should. Would you consider doing some informal mentoring?" Marcus was hesitant. "Sergeant, I'm not sure I'm the right person for that. My own adjustment hasn't exactly been smooth." "That's exactly why you're the right person," Torres replied. "These kids need to hear from someone who's been where they are, who understands that military service isn't always glorious and that it's okay to struggle sometimes." The conversation planted a seed that grew over the following weeks. Marcus found himself spending more time talking with young Marines who were dealing with homesickness, relationship problems, or doubts about their career choices. His own experiences with post-service struggles gave him credibility and empathy that resonated with Marines who were facing their own challenges. Captain Rodriguez noticed the change in both Marcus and the Marines he was helping. During her weekly meeting with Lieutenant Chen, she brought up an observation that would prove to be significant. "Have you noticed how much more settled our newer Marines seem lately?" Rodriguez asked. "Mitchell is sleeping better, Wright is more focused during training, and several others just seem more confident." Chen nodded. "It's the gunnery sergeant effect. He's been talking with them, sharing his experiences, helping them understand that military life is a journey with ups and downs." "Maybe we should make it official," Rodriguez suggested. "We've got authorization for a mentor program, and frankly, I can't think of anyone more qualified than Marcus Johnson." The proposal was presented to Marcus on a Friday afternoon. Rodriguez and Chen approached him together, outlining the opportunity to become an official mentor for Marines who were struggling with adjustment issues. The position would be part-time, in addition to your security duties, Rodriguez explained, but it would give you a chance to use your experience and knowledge to help Marines who need guidance. Marcus listened carefully to the proposal, asking questions about responsibilities and expectations. The opportunity appealed to him, but he was still uncertain about his ability to help others when he was still working through his own issues. "Can I think about it over the weekend?" he asked. "Of course," Chen replied. "But Gunny, I want you to know that every Marine on this base believes you're the right person for this job. We've seen how you connect with people, how you help them feel understood. That's a gift and it shouldn't be wasted." That weekend, Marcus found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed since the night General Williams had sat with him on the bench. The isolation and anonymity he had carefully constructed were gone, replaced by a sense of belonging and purpose he hadn't felt in years. On Monday morning, he gave Rodriguez and Chen his answer. He would accept the mentor position, but with one condition: he wanted to be completely honest with the Marines he counseled about his own struggles and recovery. He wouldn't pretend to have all the answers, but he could share his experiences and help them understand that seeking help was a sign of strength, not weakness. The announcement of Marcus's new role spread quickly through the unit. For the Marines who had come to know and respect their former security guard, it felt like a natural progression. But for Marcus, it represented something more profound: a return to the military community that had defined his adult life, and a chance to transform his painful experiences into something useful for the next generation of Marines. As he prepared for his first official mentoring session, Marcus realized that he had found something he had been searching for without knowing it: a way to honor the memory of the Marines he had lost by helping the Marines who were still serving. It wasn't the same as bringing back Jackson, Lopez, and Williams, but it was a way to ensure that their sacrifice continued to have meaning. The quiet security guard had become a mentor, a teacher, and once again a leader of Marines. But most importantly, he had rediscovered his place in the brotherhood that had always been his true home. 6 months later, the base was preparing for its annual Memorial Day ceremony. The event was always significant, but this year carried special meaning for the Marines who had come to know Marcus Johnson's story. Captain Rodriguez had suggested that Marcus speak at the ceremony, but he had politely declined, still uncomfortable with public recognition. Instead, something more powerful was taking shape. The Marines Marcus had been mentoring had quietly organized their own tribute, one that would honor not just his service, but the Marines he carried in his memory. The ceremony began traditionally, with speeches from commanding officers and the reading of names of fallen Marines. Marcus stood with the assembled formation, wearing his security uniform but carrying himself with the bearing of the decorated Marine he had always been. Lieutenant Chen stepped forward to introduce a special presentation. "Today we want to honor not just those who gave their lives in service to our country, but also those who continue to serve by carrying the memory of fallen comrades and helping future Marines understand the true meaning of brotherhood." What followed surprised everyone, including Marcus. Corporal Mitchell read a statement written collectively by the Marines Marcus had mentored. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Johnson taught us that true leadership isn't about being perfect or never making mistakes. It's about taking responsibility, learning from painful experiences, and using that knowledge to help others. He showed us that strength comes not from hiding our struggles, but from facing them and growing stronger. Then Sergeant Santos stepped forward with a special presentation. She had contacted the families of the Marines who had died under Marcus's command in Afghanistan. With their permission and blessing, she had created a memorial display featuring photos and brief biographies of Jackson, Lopez, and Williams. "Gunny," Santos said, her voice carrying across the silent formation, "these Marines died serving their country, but their memory lives on through your continued service and the Marines you've helped. They would be proud to know that their sacrifice inspired you to keep serving, even when it was difficult." Marcus felt tears he had been holding back for years begin to flow. For the first time since that day in Afghanistan, he allowed himself to grieve openly for the Marines he had lost. But more importantly, he began to understand that honoring their memory didn't require him to carry guilt and isolation as permanent burdens. The ceremony continued with testimonials from Marines who had benefited from Marcus's mentoring. Each story illustrated how his willingness to share his struggles had helped others navigate their own challenges. Private First Class Anderson, a young Marine who had been considering leaving the Corps due to homesickness, spoke about how Marcus had helped him understand that feeling lost and uncertain was normal, not a sign of weakness. Corporal Hayes talked about how Marcus's honesty about his own mental health struggles had encouraged her to seek counseling for problems she had been hiding, Sergeant. Kim described how Marcus's advice about dealing with survivor's guilt had helped him process his own experiences from a deployment where he had lost friends. As the testimonials continued, Marcus began to see his experience from a different perspective. The pain he had carried for so long hadn't been meaningless suffering. It had become a source of strength and wisdom that helped other Marines facing similar challenges. General Williams had returned for the ceremony, and she was the final speaker. Her remarks were directed specifically at Marcus, but her words resonated with every Marine present. Gunnery Sergeant Johnson, you once told me you felt like a fraud for accepting praise while carrying the guilt of Marines who died under your command. Today I want you to understand something important. Those Marines didn't die because you failed them. They died serving their country alongside a leader who cared enough about them to carry their memory forward. She paused, looking directly at Marcus. Your continued service, your willingness to help other Marines, your commitment to their memory. That's not the behavior of someone who failed. That's the behavior of a Marine who understands that the greatest honor we can give our fallen comrades is to keep serving, keep helping, and keep the values they died for alive in future generations. The ceremony concluded with the traditional moment of silence, but this time Marcus wasn't alone with his memories. He stood surrounded by Marines who understood his journey, who respected his struggles, and who had benefited from his hard-won wisdom. After the ceremony, Marcus found himself back at his familiar spot on the bench near the security station. But this time he wasn't alone with his ghosts. Young Marines stopped by to check on him. Senior NCOs sat with him to discuss shared experiences, and officers sought his advice on leadership challenges. Corporal Mitchell approached with news that brought a smile to Marcus's face. Gunny, I just got word that my brother is being assigned to this base after his advanced training. He specifically requested to serve here because he wanted to meet the Marine hero his big brother told him about. Marcus shook his head.
I'm not a hero, Corporal.
I'm just a Marine who's learned that we're stronger when we help each other carry the load. As the evening settled over the base, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since that night when General Williams had found him sitting alone in the darkness. The guilt and isolation that had defined his post-service years hadn't completely disappeared, but they had been transformed into something useful, a deeper understanding of struggle that allowed him to help others navigate their own difficult journeys. The security guard uniform he wore each day no longer felt like a disguise or a step down from his previous rank. It had become a symbol of continued service, a way to remain connected to the Marine community while contributing in a different but equally important way. He thought about Jackson, Lopez, and Williams, the Marines whose memory he carried. For years he had felt that surviving when they didn't made him unworthy of recognition or happiness. Now he understood that his survival carried an obligation, not to suffer in isolation, but to honor their sacrifice by continuing to serve, and by helping other Marines understand that seeking help and admitting struggles were acts of courage, not weakness. As the night watch took their positions and the base settled into its evening routine, Marcus stood up from the bench with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new Marines to mentor, and new opportunities to serve. The young Marines he worked with would face their own struggles, their own moments of doubt and fear, but they wouldn't face them alone. They would have the support of a brotherhood that stretched across generations, connected by shared values and mutual commitment, and they would have the guidance of a Marine who had learned that true strength comes not from avoiding failure, but from transforming painful experiences into wisdom that helps others. Marcus Johnson had finally found his way home, not to a place, but to a purpose that honored both his past service and his continued commitment to the Marines who would carry the Corps forward into the future. The guard at the gate had become much more than that. He had become a bridge between past and present, a living reminder that the Marine Corps takes care of its own, and that service never truly ends. In the quiet moments before returning to his duties, Marcus allowed himself a small prayer for the Marines he had lost, thanking them for teaching him that the greatest honor he could give them was to keep serving, keep helping, and keep the brotherhood alive for future generations of Marines who would face their own battles and need their own sources of strength and support.